This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, speaking
What's
of the
up?
union,
Yeah.
we have a union member with us.
Who we got?
He's been here before. He's back again. Let's welcome back Mr. Jeremy Amen.
Here
That
he
rhymed.
is.
I rhymed it.
You're a poet and you didn't know it.
Seriously, I got the skills to pay the bills. People might remember you from previous suggestions, such as Little John's Derailer, Ned's Atomic Dustbin's Are You Normal, Murray Attaway's In Thrall, and Dada's American Highway Flower. You also joined us for a bunch of roundtables like albums of 1990, most recently the Dinosaur Jr. in the 80s, our 80s origin roundtable that took place last year. There's no theme to your picks. Some people have themes. Some people like to stick to a particular genre, but yours are all over the place as far as I can tell, unless there's some hidden connection between all these records that you're keeping close to the vest.
There's a Da Vinci Code in there somewhere.
Yes. Is there some sort of a
They're all very early 90s. I don't know if anything. I don't know. Maybe that latest release is Murray Attaway. Not sure.
That was 93. Dada was 94. Ned's was 92. Okay. This is Derailer was 95. The album we're going to talk about is 91. So you have one from each year.
Nothing past 95.
Interesting. So
there's really no pattern, though. There's no pattern.
We'll figure it out. There's a pattern in everything, man. The universe is connected. Why don't you share with our audience your pick for 2023?
So my pick is an album called Tantrum. It's the only album by the UK band Milk. And I specify UK because I feel like there's at least 3 different bands named Milk that managed to get album releases that people could possibly still find. And I think this one is, there's actually newer bands called Milk that aren't even rock. I don't know what the heck they are, but they pop up in Apple Music when I listen to this sometimes, and I'm like, dude, it's not even close. Use something other than the name of the band. But Yep, just only album. And then they, had a couple other little things, but this is the only album by this band. And some of them continued on to do other stuff.
Okay. I have to admit here, I had a little bit of panic. I saw the in the schedule, I just scanned it and I saw the word tantrum and I thought it said tantric.
He did.
The band.
And for a brief moment, I had my stomach just dropped and oh, my God, I'm gonna have to listen to that album. But I was pleasantly surprised.
Definitely not that.
It was indeed not that.
So you mentioned this is a one and done band from the UK. So how did you come across them? When did you come across them?
So I have 2 older brothers. The middle brother is the one that initially my older brother was introducing me to a lot of stuff, but sometime around 90, I don't want to say 92 or 93, he had come back home for just, I think it wasn't like for a long time. Like he just came back to the house that we were renting. My parents were renting when I was in my senior year of high school. And he had this album on cassette, and he would just do this every once in a while. He'd be like, hey, I have this cassette, check this out. Like one time I think he actually lent this to me with Stummery, which was like the SST greatest hits from Descendants. So I got introduced to the Descendants and Milk at the same time. So that's how I found the band. I've never heard anything from them on the radio or Sirius or anything like that through the years, all the different ways that I've listened to music. Only ever heard it on that cassette, and then I eventually found a CD copy for like, I don't know, $6 or whatever at a place in Oxford, and I picked it up.
Nice. Do you know anything about this band? Because the internet's thin on information.
History of the band.
So, I guess as far as like a history of the band thing, I think I sent you most of what I know.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any nuggets that you've missed and what you looked up. I can fill them in, but any missing nuggets. But yeah, it's hard to find stuff on them. I think the primary resource for me was kind of somewhere between information in Discogs and maybe like a John Peel site or something like that.
Yeah, they were on John Peel's radio show.
He liked them a
So
bit.
they were three-piece. It's not, they don't give credits for drums, bass, guitar, vocal. It just says Chemlitz, Brown, and Keeler.
Mhm.
I don't know if you were to suss out who played what.
Yeah, I can fill that in. So,
Okay.
so Vic Kemlix is I believe, the person that is singing and playing all the guitars. And then, what is his name? I have it here somewhere. Duncan Brown, I believe, is the bass player.
Mhm.
I believe he later on went to play for Stereolab for a few albums. And then Stephen Keeler is the drummer, who also goes by Chin. So I believe if you look at the album credits, Chin is credited with all the weird drawings on the album. So I'm assuming that's just the name he chose to go by for the artwork. And I don't think I was able to find that he did anything else other than like some sort of like weird solo thing or something at some point. So Duncan Brown and Vic Keeler Kemlix are the only ones that have really gone on to do anything else.
Right. Vic was in a band called Skyscraper for about 6 years, and they were on Food Records, which I think that was the label that put out like the first Blur album. Is that right?
Well, it's definitely a label that Jesus Jones was on.
Okay.
And so like Crazy Head would have been on there, I think. And yeah, I think Blur might have. I don't know. I can't remember if Blur came out, if that first album came out on Food or not. But I mentioned Jesus Jones because I feel like Vic Kemlich's voice is somewhere between Mike Edwards from Jesus Jones and Jazz Coleman from Killing Joke. Like every time I hear him, I'm just like, this guy. It sounds like they, it sounds like they kind of went to the same school of kind of crusty cigarette tinged singing, and one of them just went in a wildly different direction than the other one after that.
Actually, every 90s release by Blur was a co-release with Food. That must be been like the original label that maybe signed them, or maybe they were a sub-label. And then Parlophone was like the major distributor for Food.
I'm starting to wonder if that's the case for Jesus Jones, if they were on Food. Maybe I'm getting the two mixed up now.
It's a real shame that Milk wasn't on Food. I'm just saying.
Yes.
They were on Eve Recordings in the UK, and they were actually on Elektra for their US distribution.
Via Link, right?
Yeah, via
Link Records was the Elektra label or
sub-label, yeah, of that. And that had a band or a couple bands that we know, the 360s and Head Candy, two albums that we reviewed in the first year of this podcast, were also on Link Records. So not a lot of releases, but we're going through the Link catalog as it, very slowly over the decades. As mentioned, this was released in the UK on LP, on vinyl, and you can pick it up for as little as $3.50 or three a pound, £3, or is it? No, they're in the
They're still pounds.
They're still pounds. They're not euros. So you can grab that if you want to. Apparently, it's not an expensive pressing.
It's probably important to note that this album came out probably the month after all the big albums in 91. Came out in October of 91, at least in the UK.
Oh yes, that would have been a
to give
tough
you some
follow.
To give you some you know, when you're thinking about other albums that you might be comparing and contrasting this with around that time, just keep in mind that these guys were probably recording at the same time that those people were recording.
Interesting. Let's get into some comments from our Patreon page. We'll share the poll results of Were the Album Better EP or Decent Single, along with our pick at the end of the show. But you mentioned if this was going to be our next Garo, sir, nothing can approach that. Nothing can approach Tokyo Anal Dynamite. There's the only thing maybe is like Neil Young's Arc or Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed. Like those are the only contenders getting close to what that album gave us.
That was more of a prediction for how it was going to do in the polls.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, I ignored the polls because this is an album that, you know, has a certain place in my heart. It's not like an album that I, you know, have big feelings for, but it is an album that I listen to and I think, I wonder what other people think about this album. So nothing will shock me.
You want to share your music, and that's wonderful. That's why we're here.
Yeah, for sure.
Jeff Gentis said, sounds like a harsher Green River Mudhoney Jesus Lizard. He called it a mencore. So you apparently you have your own genre now of music. Congratulations. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Tantrum by Melk J. Tell me one thing you liked about this record.
The guitars, I mean, they pop on this record. They're mixed loud, and they're doing a lot of really inventive things. So we start the album off with Claws, which it showcases this slightly bluesy kind of swagger riff, but then it's accented with these crazy dive bombs and squeals. So right away you're getting guitar in the face. You know you're in store for some twists and turns. That continues. You know, as you get into Is That It? You hear some, like, you know, using guitars and chords more of like sound effects, like these siren-like guitar parts, pinched harmonics, like all kinds of really expressive, interesting choices, different ways to use the instrument. Still, you know, I think playing off of you know, fairly traditional core like rock guitar riff and tone, but like just twisting and turning it. Surgery, some really cool like little like trill parts, like picking dissonant notes, some really bizarre section in the middle, with I don't even know what's going on, like very strange scales, like out of nowhere, like what the hell scale is that? So just even in songs where, things might feel a little bit predictable, like there's a lot often in these songs, there's middle sections that, guitar wise do some really interesting or bizarre or unexpected things. So I think the guitars are really compelling. They're like I said, they're loud, almost to the point of the vocal being pushed back. So you really get into the dynamics of what the guitar player is playing, and then also you do hear, as you spend more time with the record, a pretty solid rhythm section that can do. I hear sometimes when they're grooving, I hear some stuff that is a little bit more technical, almost like Hot Seat reminded me in moments like early Soundgarden, and the way the bass and the drums were working off each other. And in general, I think the rhythm section is really tight. The bass will pop out here and there. Is That It is a good example where, it almost gets into a Primus territory with what's going on with the bass. There's usually some distortion on it too, which I think helps fill out the mix with the 3-piece. So I think there's some really cool interplay going on here between the bass, drums, and then the guitars are being, pretty much over the top the entire record. So that's, I think musically what I'm most compelled by on this record. And, I think the vocals are diverse and can be strong. I'm not focusing on what works because it's almost like they're overpowered by the guitar and the band. So that's what worked for me. A lot of good energy too, just overall. It feels like a vibrant, energetic band. What worked for you, Tim?
Yeah, the energy and I could see this band being either a total mess or incredible live, depending on how tight they were. It reminded me, we did an album many years ago. It took me a while to look it up. Carp, they're self-titled, which was kind of this Melvin's sludge metal, but like heavy, and you would get these like blazing fast songs. The guitars were always dissonant. You get like really frenetic energy, and this album reminds me of that, along with what you mentioned and what was mentioned in the comments. Like I heard a lot of David Yao and Jesus Lizard and Scratch Acid with this album, and I also heard like Shellac, the Steve Albini sound with regards to it being a 3-piece, and all that stuff has this chaotic energy that I think is really interesting, that you don't really hear a lot of bands doing that anymore. But the weird thing is that you can hear in that some like very straight up metal in things that are happening. And some of it is sort of taking a very twisted route, like through the Seattle Green River sound, that obviously had, its foot in 70s metal and 80s punk and hardcore. And there's that in this record as well. There are songs that sound like they at the beginning of certain tracks. Let's see which one I was talking about. Was it a hot seat? Like that song, that could be Green River, that down, or that could have been like an 80s like guitar, depending on what the tone of the guitar is. That could have been, that could have been an 80s hard rock song.
Yeah.
Just depending on how you play that, how that guitar is, the treble and the bass and all that kind of thing. it's a really strange record in the way that Carp record was, and I found myself going back to that record every once in a while just because it's so weird and monstrously loud. And it's weird that this is happening in 91 concurrently with a lot of the sounds, but it's in the UK. I think I find that really interesting because I don't think of UK bands as playing this. This sounds like it would have been from like New York, you know what I mean? Or Chicago or something like that, or some city in the US that had loud abrasive music happening at the beginning of the 90s. But to know that they were coming out of the UK is, I can't, like, this is the complete opposite of everything that I think of 1991 in the UK. I'm thinking of like Happy Mondays and Jesus and Mary Chain and that kind of stuff. And this doesn't sound anything like that.
No.
I can't even think of another UK band that sounds like this, which is what makes it so interesting.
Yeah. That is weird.
Jeremy.
I mean, but maybe that's what made it pop, though, is just so different.
Yeah. Jeremy, what this is your pick. What do you like about this record?
I mean, initially when I listened to it back in 92 or whatever, I was just mainly interested in the energy and just the crazy guitars and sometimes just like sometimes I was just kind of obsessed trying to figure out what the hell they were singing about. What exactly is Vic going on about? It was kind of confusing to me. So those are kind of the things that I was originally drawn in by. But going back and listening to it, recently, because it'd probably been a year or two since I listened to it, and just trying to analyze it a little bit more, I started to realize that there's a lot of stuff that I'm hearing that sounds production wise, like the bass tone and stuff like that. It reminds me of Cop Shoot Cops Ask Questions Later. I couldn't like every time I listened to it, at some point the bass would just hit me and I'd be like, that is straight off of Cop Shoot Cops Ask Questions Later. And I realized that what draws me back to the album is that I stay away from it for a year or two and then I come back and I listen to it and I'm always hearing something new, not that sounds like it was inspired by something that came before it, but something that sounds like it inspired something that came after it. And it wouldn't surprise me trying to think of when that. Yeah, I think Ask Questions Later might have come out in 92 or 93, so probably a little too close for that to necessarily be an inspiration of any sort. But I mean, I heard some of that stuff, but then I also heard some things that kind of had where they sounded like they might be a little bit inspired by maybe a little bit of Primus and Faith No More, a little bit of Mudhoney or Green River, that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it just initially drew me in because it's 8 songs. We're going to discount the Gregor thing, which I will explain if you want me to, but it's
Please
8
do.
songs and none of them sound the same to me. I mean, they're just very, very different pieces. I mean, they all have similar production styles, I mean, they have a very similar sound, but where they go musically on each of those songs, aside from like the wheelies that he likes to do all the time, the pinched harmonics and all that stuff, it's I just appreciate it as an album overall. It's a fun trip to go on. But regarding the Gregor, which I imagine they call it Gregor because it kind of sounds like a chant, but it's obviously backwards. And what it is it's part of the vocal melody to a song from their 1990 EP called Birthquake. And the very first song on that is called Tad. And I only recently discovered this. I would hear this album all the time and I would think, I'm going to play that backwards and find out what that is. And I finally did it about a week and a half ago. And because I just couldn't recognize it. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I played it, recorded it backwards, played it back. And I was like, oh, this is the first song off of their first EP. As far as I know, it's their first EP. I've read that they got together like in 86 or something like that, but the only music I can find is from 90 and 91. So anyway, that's where that comes from.
Okay. I agree with what you said about not all the songs or the songs not sounding the same. It is like this is this song. Like this is the song that's all the big double bends and like on Surgery, a lot of big like that kind of stuff. And then Claus has like these, you mentioned it, Jay, like there's these scales. It's like and I'm like, what is that thing he's doing?
Right. I'm like, but it repeats, so he's not just like playing random notes. Like it is some kind of scale of some kind, but I don't understand it.
Some of this reminded me in that respect of like Into Another, with that sort of like guitar virtuosity that you're just like kind of dazed by the level of skill that's going on.
Yeah.
And knowing that he's singing while he's also playing. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot more guitar playing than there is singing.
Yeah.
But there's still, that's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did remind me of that. There was like, maybe I would say Jane's Addiction is the best known, but there felt like a lot of a pool of bands in the late 80s, early 90s that were in a space like this, like truly alternative, but from a hard rock, 80s rock, almost like background, that were just doing weird shit, like trying to push things. You could hear like some of the musicians in the band were, really, really talented, but they were probably taking a lot of drugs and doing a lot of like trying to figure out something new and weird to do. And, I think this is maybe Into Another might be a band like that. This might be a band like that, like trying to take all those, 80s metal riffs they learned in guitar lessons they took and like just turn it and take a complete left turn and do something totally different with it.
Well, and it got me thinking about that T-Ride album that we just did, because that is an album that's on the cusp of, the 90s. And it's a completely different end of, we've got some metal influences, but we're going to completely upend that and do this new thing. And their thing was, we're going to have insane Queen harmonies combined with like Janet Jackson electro drums but it's going to be like this insane rock record. And then this one, you could say, like, when I heard beginning of book 1, page 1, it almost sounded like a Megadeth song at the beginning, that dun 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 dun. Like I was like, okay, there's guys are definitely, I can see them being into thrash. Like that makes sense that they would be into thrash bands. But then instead of going in a super pop direction like T-Ride did with their production, this is just clean room. It's very like it is not glossy, and it is in your face, which is, again, like you said, these are all these artists who are like, well, which way what are we going to do now? Like I thought when I was 15, I was going to be doing this, but now that I'm like 20 something, I kind of don't want to do that anymore, but I still want to rock.
Yep. Yeah. They're, they had the same gut instinct that all the other bands that were released albums in the fall of 91 had. They were recording this record at the same time. They just had their own interpretation of like, where do we take this?
Right.
Which I think is interesting. There were just so many, for whatever happened in the culture or whatever, like it seemed like everybody at one time got the signal, like, okay, enough of this shit. I got to do something different.
Right.
And there was this divergence of like, well, these are all the different things we could do, and then it all sort of settled out over the next year or two to essentially grunge or whatever, however you wanted to find that.
Right. I'm just
It's
stuck on the fact that they were, I guess, because Sub Pop did gain notoriety in the UK before the US. They pushed really hard the Green River, Melvins, not Melvins, Soundgarden, and what was the other ones? Bands that were on that label at that time. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember who else was on the label at that time, but they had like a UK like interest. They were written up in the magazines in like 88, 89, 90. So I could see that's how you would probably I mean, how else are you going to discover Green River, to be honest?
Yeah.
Like if they were listening to Green River at all, which I mean, we're hearing it in retrospect that they sound similar, but it's entirely possible they never heard Green River. It just happens to sound close, but there's no internet. So how are you going to discover a obscure band from the Pacific Northwest that's doing that kind of, or Malfunction or something? You know what I mean? Like,
I think that's stuff that John Peel used to do on his show. Actually, I think that like those early Sub Pop acts like Nirvana with their Bleach album, I think that he was keen on that, and I think maybe Green River or Mudhoney as well. That might be just about the only way that you'd really get anybody in the UK introduced to that stuff. I mean, hell, us in the Midwest hardly knew about it, really. So
exactly, I don't know how to make cross the ocean, but good PR. That's what it was. Jay, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this record?
My biggest complaint about the record is I just don't think the production matches the band correctly. There's too much reverb. There's way too much reverb on the drums. Mm-hmm. I want to hear this band as like a, produced by Steve Albini. Like I want to hear them dry, punchy, gritty, raw. There's just too much gloss slapped on top of this. And it creates, I think, more on the songs that are abrasive. It actually, I think, makes them more abrasive, because then you end up with like all that reverb, you know what I mean? Just clogged up. They're hitting these dissonant notes, and then it's hitting this delay and a reverb and another reverb. And it's just sort of this echo of noise that doesn't, I think, help. Or like a Dave Sardy or something like that producing would be interesting. And something that's really more in tune with what the sound of the band is. It seems like this production is mismatched. It would be a production you'd use for, I don't know, Jane's Addiction or something, or a straight up hard rock band, not a band doing this type of trying to push the boundaries and do things more aggressive. So that's my biggest complaint. I think this album plays different. And I think the tones are fine. I think what they captured is probably workable. It just sounds like they added a ton of reverb on top of it. So I think that's holding the record back. I also think After Gregor, throwaway track, for me, the album, it kills the album for me. Those last two tracks I perceive them as being much more aggressive than the rest of the record. The rest of the record up until that point, like I can hear songs, I can hear melodies emerge, even though there's like dissonance things and, noisy things. I still find things to grab onto, and it feels musical to me. After Gregor, and then we get into the last two songs, I lose that, and it just feels like more noisy and just aggressive and less musical. It kind of loses the script for me a bit. I don't know if those two songs are actually that way, or that's the way I perceive them after sitting through Gregor and then skipping it and being annoyed I have to skip it. So that's mostly what's not working for me. Production, and then it fizzles at the end. Anything that work for you, Tim?
I agree with you. There's a little bit too much reverb on this record. I think I like Vic's vocal. I just don't think he's coming up with the most interesting melodies, which I understand is sort of second concern when you're building these songs. I mean,
Yeah.
but when I think about other people in this space, who have this sound, David Yao would be sort of, because I mentioned Scratch Acid and Jesus Lister would be comparable. I feel like he like occasionally finds like a word or a phrase that's interesting and can turn it into a hook, even if it doesn't really seem like a hook. And he's just got a personality, and I don't know that this band separates itself in the vocal department, and that's probably why it's so obscure, because musically it's intense and crazy and cool, and a lot of people should be like, oh, there's this awesome band that nobody's heard of. But I think because the vocals are just sort of average, that it doesn't get that push, the way that, like, people talk about like the White Octave as being like this band that, oh my gosh, that band, they were so good. And like they could have that sort of like underground, talk years later, if maybe there was just something on here that was just like a little bit hooky, not a pop hook, just a good catchy line or phrase or something like that. So that was really the only thing that just didn't jive with me. Jeremy, anything that doesn't work for you?
Well, first of all, the Gregor bit, a minute and 20 seconds of backwards singing by itself, it sounds like it's kind of reverbed out. Usually when there's like a throwaway track, it bothers me less and less the more I listen to the album. This is probably it's probably because it's a minute and 20 seconds, with nothing but that vocal, seemingly no purpose to it. It kind of breaks up the album, and I can see what Jay's getting at with the last two tracks. I mean, there's still things that I like about them, but like when I listen to Pyrosulfate, the thing that I think about the most is I feel like it's the song that the bass player hates playing the most, because there's just this repetitive do 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 just over and over again on the bass for what seems like forever. I'm like, if I was the bass player, I would want to, if it's his own idea, then it serves him right. But if it's something that Vic was like, hey, this is what I want you to do on the bass, he should have been like, screw you, we're going to do a little bit more or a little bit less, but I'm not doing this over and over again. Really for me, in the vocals, like, it's funny that you mentioned Megadeth earlier, because I actually made a note. I feel like in some ways this is it has kind of a Megadeth feel to me, and that not like musically per se, but just this kind of attitude of like, hey, I'm a guitarist. I think I'm a good guitarist, and I think I can write songs, and who better to sing them than me? Because I mean, those first couple Megadeth albums, especially, which I think at least one of those was produced by the band or produced by Dave Mustaine, if I'm not mistaken. Similar to this situation, Milk, I think, produced this album.
Yeah.
Just really rough sounding, and some bad choices made in the recording, or not enough takes being taken. That's just how I feel. The reverb, yeah, definitely. I'm used to it now. I've listened to it enough that it just kind of makes me chuckle. But if I had cared about production back in '92, that probably would have been a big turnoff for me. But I mean, I was like digging back into the old, SST stuff with Dinosaur Jr. and some really bad recording quality on that stuff. So it didn't bother me back then, and it doesn't really bother me now. But yeah, I can see, like I said, this is kind of an album where I was like, let's see what other people think about this, because my opinion is heavily skewed, because I got this when I was 17 years old and just liked it from the beginning.
Dave Mustaine produced Peace Sells. Who's buying? their 1986 album. The thing about Megadeth to me was, and I haven't spent a ton of time with their catalog, but I have listened to a number of records. Even though obviously they were like super heavy and fast, it's like the guitars still somehow felt like small at times with him. I don't know, it was like the compression or just the frequency of his guitars, but they never felt as big as like Metallica guitars. Metallica guitars felt like a sledgehammer a lot of the times, and Megadeth did not always feel particularly heavy. It maybe, and again, you know, he would do a lot of like really showy off things, so maybe it was just him that was better for his tone. Showy off, that's my new phrase. But we've never really covered Megadeth on this podcast, and they're kind of important to the 90s. I mean, they had multiple popular albums in the 90s.
In the 90s band.
Yeah.
That was their biggest decade, though. I mean, that's the tough thing about, you know, it's one of those, like, can you dig out Megadeth? You know, I mean, I probably listened to oh my God, why am I drawing a blank on the album title now? I just shared a joke version of the album of the cover.
Countdown to Extinction?
Euthanasia?
No. The one before that. With
Rust
Hangar
in Peace?
18 and
Rust in Peace.
So Rust in Peace is my go-to Megadeth album.
Yeah.
Like
I played
and I think the comparison to go, you know, the Megadeth Metallica thing is, I think that Megadeth kept the sound smaller because honestly, I feel like they were doing more interesting things during the verses of the songs and in between the verses of the songs than Metallica was.
Yeah.
Just musically, I just feel like it was, I don't know, a little bit of kind of a just more interesting stuff was happening. Metallica was like, yeah, they're big and tough and it's fun and it's cool, but you're just waiting for the solos as far as the guitar goes, pretty much. It's like, yeah, they got a big chunky riff, but where's that solo? Anyway.
Megadeth would be fun in the 90s for me because I listened to Rust in Peace a ton. I listened to Countdown to Extinction, but I don't think I've ever heard Risk. I don't think I've ever heard Cryptic Writings. Like, there's the whole second half of the decade, they put out records that I don't even know, which is...
Euthanasia was the last one I listened to all the way through. And I felt like it was kind of a disappointment.
Maybe heard the radio singles from that, because at that point they were a radio band, which
Train
was so
of Consequences.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, and I think Trust was the single off of Cryptic Writings, and I don't remember another song off of that album. Because we were still in college at that point, so it probably came in, like the single probably came into the radio station in 97 when that came out, but I don't remember a dang thing about that record. But I do remember listening to Countdown to Extinction and well, pretty much that one. I think I dabbled with Euthanasia.
I dabbled.
I think I gave it a listen or two, but
that is a soundbite that you don't want coming back to bite you.
Exactly.
Later.
Please don't take me out of context when I'm at my first debate for the school board. Timonici dabbles in euthanasia. Anyway,
and even if you try and change it to mean youth in Asia, it still sounds bad.
Terrible.
Jared Fogle.
Let's get out of this. Let's pull the ripcord on this section right here. So this came out in 1991, and this is the week after Nevermind, and 2 weeks after Use Your Illusion. So this ain't doing nothing, folks, on American radio. Maybe college radio. That's about it. But it has to be the college radio that actually is a little bit adventurous, because even in 91, you're not getting on like mainstream college radio. Like, this would not have been on WFAL. It would have had to been on like a specialty show, or they'd kick it over to WBGU where they played like the weird underground music. Like, our station was even though it was a college radio station, it wouldn't, I don't think, play something like this. This obscure.
Yeah.
Probably didn't even get serviced, to be honest. Probably didn't even I doubt we got a promo CD. Because I don't even see
and it didn't
one
come here
listed
until 92, I think.
Yeah, it came out in 92 in the US, and there's no promo copy listed, which means they might not have even sent it out unless, maybe a few copies here or there, but usually if there's a promo copy, it's in Discogs and it's not listed there. So no radio version went out, maybe for a single, but I don't see anything for the album. Well, let's get into our overall ratings on this record. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single? We'll share the poll results shortly. But Jay, where do you land?
I'm going to land at an EP. I'm just going to take the first 6 tracks. I think those leave you wanting more, which is a good thing. As opposed to, I think, keeping the last 2 and going through Gregor, you're sort of, even at 39 minutes, you're still, I don't know, at least I was, it's a lot of information. There's a lot going on. I think at 6 songs, I'm more intrigued and want to go back and play it again. So I think I'm landing an EP. Where are you at, Tim?
Interesting. So I agree with you. Gregor's out the door. That should be like the hidden track number 99. I don't even want it to follow directly. I want it.
Have to go to count it up to all the other missing tracks.
Yes. And book 1, page 1. I think if that song was 3 minutes instead of 5.5 minutes, it would be more palatable. There's so much dissonance in that song. It's okay. So I would go with 7 songs, and that's pretty short. 7 songs. We're probably looking at 30 something minutes. I guess that's an album. I guess that makes it an album. Yeah. So I'm going to say we're the album. So I think I think the first 6 songs are strong. It just, that Gregor track is not my cup of tea. So Jeremy, where are you? We're the album, better EP. Who's right? Who's wrong?
I'm going to go with we're the album, but again, it just sticks with me more as time goes on. It's a good, it's a fun album to listen to, and it reminds me of a weird time in my life. So I don't know. I enjoy it. I will say, if you find an EP here, maybe check out the 2, I guess you'd call them singles. They were basically 2 3-song singles. I can't even call them singles because the names of them they're really mini EPs. One came out in 90 and one came out in 91. First one's called Birthquake. I can't remember what the second one is called, but they are streaming on Apple Music. Perambulator, I think, or something like that. I think it's the second one.
Sure.
It's still a very similar sound. In some ways, it sounds a little bit like you would expect the band to sound a little bit earlier on, and then maybe explores maybe 1 or 2 other sounds in those 6 tracks that you don't hear on this. So you could probably take a couple of those songs and put them with this, and find a way to make the track listing work for a pretty good 8 or 9 song album.
I think those 3 songs that are in each of those are collected on one single EP. It's called Rash.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe they put that out on CD to collect, because it doesn't, well, it looks like it was LP and CD. Keep it on Rough Trade.
Oh, something I forgot about with those is a couple of those songs are some of these songs in their infancy. So slightly, different arrangement. You can hear some of the melodies in there, but then they just have completely different lyrics and a change in production and arrangement. I think there's one called Wings, which I think is actually an early version of Claws. So it's for somebody that likes to go back and listen to the evolution of the band, listen to those, listen to this, and then maybe check out Skyscraper as well. They're on Bandcamp, and I think one of their albums on Bandcamp has a shitload of extra tracks that you don't get on the CD. Like the CD is 12 tracks, and I think on Bandcamp it's 20 something. So worth checking out, free to listen to.
I think because of the obscurity of this band, it's their stuff is pretty reasonably priced on Discogs, because so they have the album, and then the 2 EPs, which you could either get them each separately or you could get the Rash combination. But basically you could get all 4 of those releases plus the Hot Seat Girth 7-inch for $10. Like that's how they're all for like $150, $250, all vinyl too. That's what's interesting. So you can pretty much pick up the whole catalog for the cost of a cup of coffee, because coffee's expensive now.
Yes.
Well, our poll over at Patreon shook out like this: 33% were the album, 17% better EP, 50% decent single. So
I suspected.
I think it was brave of you. I agree with what you said, that there are albums that you enjoy, and you as in the universal you, that you enjoy and you want to share them with people, but you're like, nobody's going to like, this is so weird. This is so not weird, or like this only scratches an itch for me. And nobody I know does this scratch an itch. Like I could never show anybody like try to explain Aphex Twin to somebody. It's like, it's electronic music, but not.
I have some weirder guilty pleasures from the 90s. I might, in future picks, I might bring some of those in too.
I think guilty pleasure is different than this is a difficult album. Like the Funk Junkies are a guilty pleasure of mine.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't hesitate to show anybody that their cover of I Love It Loud. Like that's an instant call up on Alexa. I didn't set her off. Okay. Well, thanks, Jeremy. Thank you for bringing this record to us.
Thank you.
This is like, if you go look at our mission statement, this is what it's all about. Finding the stuff that never would have discovered this. Never would have found this album if it hadn't been for Jeremy bringing it to the podcast, because who knew?
Now with so many bands named Milk.
I mean, that's true. That's true. That's true as well.
I'm with you on when this album ends, it always starts playing this most random stuff. Like usually like Apple Music does a pretty good job of like keeping in the same vibe. not with this record.
And I have to ask, because we're all from, well, I mean, Jay, you're from kind of the Cleveland area, right?
Yep.
And so we've got Cleveland, we've got Buffalo, and we have Cincinnati. It was a long time in my life before I heard somebody pronounce what I say as milk as milk with the M-E-L-K instead of the M-I-L-K. I had a discussion with my wife about this, and she was just like, well, what's wrong with that? And I was like, well, I mean, imagine if you pronounced other words that have an I-L in them with an E-L sound. It would be very, I have to go home. I'm feeling L, or, it's just, I just started going off and like coming up with other things. So I was kind of like, I couldn't remember. I knew that one of you pronounced it, at least one of you pronounced it that way.
Milk.
And I was like, okay, so is this a Buffalo thing or is this?
I say milk. Yeah.
Milk.
So maybe it's more of a
milk.
Maybe there's like
milk. I gotta like milk.
Milk.
It hurts the roof of my mouth when I do it that way. Milk.
I get scolded by my wife whenever I say it too.
You say will instead of well. You say ill instead of L. You say pill instead of pell. So why wouldn't milk be milk instead of milk? That's the thing that's always confused me.
This is a Gallagher routine, by the way.
Yeah.
Dude, I was probably like in my 20s before anybody ever told me. Like I had never noticed. I think, I don't know if it was my wife or somebody said like, why do you say it that way? I was like, what do you mean?
Jay, what do you rest your head on at night?
A pillow. So I say pillow.
Sounds like there's an E sound there.
He says pillow. So that's where he and I differ, because I say pillow.
Yeah.
As God intended. And he says pillow like a Satanist.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a Lorraine thing or what, but
yeah,
what do you call a carbonated beverage?
Now I say
well,
soda, but soda.
yeah,
I used to say pop.
we always said pop where I came from,
Pop.
and now it's kind of like it's interchangeable. You know, I probably say soda more now because we always refer to Black Francis. You know, saying the thing about buying me a soda, and well, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then never mind.
Which song is that in?
It's is it on Bone Machine? I'm trying to which song that
I
is.
think you're right. Yeah, because I'm hearing that in my head, and the cadence sounds like it's from that song.
Yeah.
I
but yeah, my
could
wife and
recognize
I
the lyric,
bring
but I
that
just
up
couldn't
all the
place it. But any other words, Jay, that you pronounced incorrectly?
I think those are the two biggies that I get called
Those are the
on.
two.
What about water? Did either of you do water with the R?
No,
in
we're
it?
not from Pittsburgh.
No, but in Texas,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
the big chain is Whataburger, and everybody here calls it Whataburger. Or no, I'm sorry, it's Whataburger, and everybody here calls it Waterburger.
Ew.
I don't know
Although I
why.
do put a little bit of water in when I make a hamburger patty, so you know, I guess that's fair.
It's so bizarre.
So wait, you got Wahlburgers and Whataburger?
Yes.
I'm jealous. Are those both
Yes.
smash burger type places?
No, Whataburger's it's like McDonald's. Like, I mean, it's better than that, but it's, you know, that's type of menu. And
No.
He's like have you ever had Swenson's?
I have not, but I'm aware of it.
Have you, Jeremy?
No, I don't get to travel much.
Well, they opened one
well.
literally around the corner from my house, and I had never had it, and that's like one of my favorite burgers now, because it's just like you like you said, it's like McDonald's, but like 100 times better. It's not this huge burger. It's not like we have a Shake Shack now too, and to get like burgers for me and Katie's like $35.
Yeah.
Where Swenson's, I can go up and get like, you know, 2 burgers, onion rings, and a milkshake, and it's like $12.
I have to experience this now. So I'm going to find an excuse, like a concert or something in the Columbus area.
Yeah.
And come up there and check this place out. You know, I'll try and get you and who else is up? Is it Patrick and Chip? Are they both up in that area?
Pat and Chip, yeah, they're both up here. Dewey, who's been on and off with the show, he's here as well. In fact, Chip and Dewey over the weekend were at Stabbing Westward together. They played, and I get a text from Dewey, and he's like, "Why aren't you here, man? This is like prime." Didn't even know it was happening, and it
should have been covering it live, Sam.
I know I should have been down there with my Wes Nessman on the scene.
We're doing a dig me out invasion of Swenson's. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I you know, it's cool, like pulling up your car and having them run over and doing it the old school way.
I think the original one is in Akron.
Yep. Yeah.
That's why you probably haven't seen it in Cincinnati yet. So
not everything
been around
is great.
a long time.
Like I tried their like pulled pork, wasn't great.
You know, like I think was it Mark Twain that said that basically inferred that everything happens in Ohio much later than, you know, like at the end of the world, you go to Ohio because it happens later. Cincinnati is the Ohio of Ohio. Yeah. So everything happens in the rest of the state, and then it makes its way to Cincinnati.
We do have a skyline also. I have like a insane amount of fast food within like 30 seconds of my house.
Well,
it's crazy.
Nice. Maybe the most redeeming part about Columbus.
Yes,
the fast food capital of the world. And then there's a chain, it's there.
We've got like one of the best taco places in the state right around the corner, and there's this Indian place that they have biryani, which is a spicy Indian, like really spicy. And Jay, let me tell you, after 2 times going to the local wing place and being completely unfazed by their wing sauce, I got the lowest level of the biryani, and it like I was sweating through my eyeballs. It was so hot. I don't know. I'll even say, please, for the love of God, low amount of spice, and they're still just like burning my ears off.
Yeah.
So I have not completely tackled the spice.
Well, I apologize for the milk question and taking us totally off track there. But I am really interested in these food options. Though.
This is the bonus end of the show bonus stuff that people just love. Speaking of the people, our patrons get to vote on polls like the one for this episode, plus our monthly tournament polls, plus various other polls like for aughts episodes by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. That's where the Patreon union forms. You can get onto our Discord where all sorts of chatter happens about bands and gardening. digmeoutpodcast.com is where you go to submit albums for our suggested album or on our suggested album page. Album, artist, while you're submitting it, goes into our monthly poll and the patrons pick the album. The box newsletter is also at digmeoutpodcast.com. It's where you go to sign up for the newsletter and get a weekly calendar of releases relevant to aughts, 90s and 80s music, movies, TV shows, documentaries, books, all that kind of stuff, and 2 1-minute reviews each week. And lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go leave some positive feedback for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.